It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, General Ray Odierno, who is the Commander, U.S. Joint Forces Command. We couldn't find a speaker, I think, better qualified to talk to the subject of this conference. He really defines what you're looking for in a leader in the joint community, especially as we define joint today as including interagency and coalition in that process. As I'm sure you all know, just before coming to U.S. Forces Command, General Odierno spent 2 years commanding the multinational force and the U.S. forces in Iraq. Almost immediately before that, with only a 7-month break, he had been over there commanding 3rd Corps and the multinational Corps Iraq from December 2006 to February of 2008. Prior to that, he's commanded at every level within the Army and the joint community. He was certainly no stranger to Iraq, where he had been earlier commanding the 4th Infantry Division, and was there throughout the first year of Operation Iraqi Freedom from April 2003 to March 2004. And it was during that period of time, while he was in command in Iraq, that members of the 4th Infantry Division captured the former President Saddam Hussein near Tikrit. He's also had staff assignments at virtually every level in our government, and I think probably understands the world situation better than most, having been the primary military advisor to 2 Secretaries of State, Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. Again, I don't think we could find a person better qualified to talk to us about joint operations, and having just come back from Iraq and now guiding the process of restructuring the joint community in the Department of Defense, which is obviously a critical task, so that we don't lose all that we've learned in this process, and we make sure that it's institutionalized going forward. So please join me in a warm AFCEA and U.S. Naval Institute welcome to General Ray Odierno.
Well, I didn't realize to get up here. There's a lot of bright lights up here. First, welcome everyone. It's an honor to be here. Ken, thank you so much for your kind introduction. It's certainly a pleasure to join and be with you all today. Secretary Wynn, General Halick, other general officers, Sergeant Major Battaglia, my battle buddy, all the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardmen that are here, all of the great civilians and contractors who constantly support our military, I thank you so much for having the opportunity to spend some time with you this afternoon. I want to talk about a few things. First, I want to start out by saying how important it is for us to consider how to leverage the successes of recent joint and coalition warfare. I believe that there is much to learn, not just from our successes, but really more importantly, from our shortcomings. I want to briefly describe our recent joint and coalition successes and challenges. How we leverage our past experience depends very much on our view of the current and future environment in which we'll operate as a joint force. So I'll also briefly touch on my perspective of the emerging strategic environment that we face. An environment that I certainly can say right up front is characterized by significant fiscal constraints in the future. Finally, I'll offer some of my thoughts on how we might leverage our joint and coalition warfare experience as we move forward. Contemporary joint and coalition warfare, what I'll refer to as our warfare experience, includes, as I just said, many successes and challenges. Since the tragic events of September 11th, now nearly 10 years ago, we have fought as a joint force and in a coalition with dozens of diverse international allies and partners. Our warfare experience since 9/11 has accelerated jointness and expanded our understanding and appreciation for the importance and the necessity of coalition operations. There have certainly been successful tactical engagements and larger operations during that time. But I'm certainly not going to stand up here right now and declare outright success in joint and coalition operations. We still have very much work to do. Recent experience in Iraq and Afghanistan has provided us a heightened appreciation for a range of lethal and non-lethal tools necessary for our force to master and situationally apply not only to current but future complex operational environments. We've also learned that coalition warfare doesn't just enhance international legitimacy for action, but it also brings valuable perspective, unique capabilities, and access. Current operations in Libya and the transition to a NATO-led operation underscores the importance of long-standing relationships and cooperation, which leads to better technical and doctrinal interoperability. This is crucial for us as we move ahead in the future, and we certainly still have much work to do in this area. What's more, we've not only realized the benefits of coalition warfare, difficult as it may often be, but we've gained much greater appreciation for the vital contribution of all elements of United States national power through a comprehensive interagency approach. But our culture of jointness won't survive without sustained effort, particularly when we move to reset our forces in the wake of our current main efforts in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places around the world. Nor is the future of coalition warfare assured without sustained engagement during peacetime. So given our recent warfare experience, how do we move forward? That depends on your view of the strategic environment. The strategic environment in which we collectively operate, really the world we all live in today, is increasingly changing and increasingly complex. Our world is at once interconnected instantaneously, yet billions still live in relative isolation from the fruits of liberty and prosperity which we all enjoy every single day here at home. Our world is increasingly globalized by communications, technology, which has allowed many of those who are disenfranchised peoples to see what they're missing, and has enabled them to challenge the status quo at the speed of Twitter. Globalization has also given rise to new emerging powers, both state and non-state actors. And the balance of power among nations has shifted, tilted away from the West and toward rising Asian powers, notably China, and to a somewhat lesser extent, India. But we must remember that security and prosperity are not zero-sum equation in today's world. It is in our best interest that every nation enjoy greater prosperity and security. However, it is difficult to see the current strategic environment inherently trending toward peace unless we, along with others, act to positively influence it. It depends on how we understand and engage in competition and cooperation with the globalized world. We must remain engaged. The question we face, though, is how do we do this? What capabilities do we need? How do we in the military develop a set of comprehensive tools that, along with our interagency partners, will allow us to engage and influence across a broad spectrum of issues and cultures? How do we give the President a variety of usable tools, both lethal and non-lethal, to address his own policy issues? What we can say with great historical accuracy is that the future is unpredictable. But we must make an educated guess about its principal features. I believe current strategic trends are a valid guide to the near future, and principal among them is the fiscal crisis emerging in our own country. This crisis is perhaps our primary threat to national security, given the interwoven nature of economic prosperity, power, and security. The previous decade was characterized by expansion across the government in many of our coalition, as well as many of our coalition partner governments. The coming decade could be one of contraction. Any plan to fight our way out of the fiscal predicament will entail burden sharing across the government. What impact this will have on the Department of Defense is not yet known. But I do know we will need an even greater creativity and resourcefulness on part of our joint force, as well as our coalition partners, to face these complex challenges that are ahead. But first, it is important that we must determine the risk to our own national security objectives and then set priorities. We then must avoid the trap of doing more with less. This is a recipe for creating a hollow force that is under-resourced. So in light of our warfare experience and the emerging strategic environment, how do we leverage these insights as we move forward? We must continue to learn from our recent warfare experience, such as the lessons of asymmetric warfare. But we must recognize new emerging challenges which change the characteristic of future conflict and require us to adapt, require us to continually assess, require us to redefine, potentially, the military art. At the most basic level, we must harness those insights from our warfare experience through critical assessment, qualitative and quantitative analysis, and formal lessons learned. Provide the mechanisms to plow the most important, relevant insights back into adaptive training to prepare our joint and coalition teams for ongoing future challenges and operations. And as I've already said, one key characteristic of the emerging environment is our governmental fiscal crisis. In what way can we leverage that? Where is the opportunity in something generally regarded as an unambiguous negative? The opportunity lies in the fact that we are now forced to make decisions which previously we could avoid. Additionally, this opportunity comes at a time when we're looking at resetting much of our force after a decade of persistent war, and a time when services might naturally gravitate inward. Recently, the Secretary of Defense noted that the tendency of our military bureaucracy, indeed any big organization, is to return to old and comfortable habits. We in no way can afford to do this as we look to the future. We have to move forward toward a more integrated joint force. We must aggressively eliminate unnecessary redundancy within the Department of Defense. We must be more efficient and mitigate reduced capacity by working together more closely. Not just more closely between the services, but within the broader U.S. government. I'm encouraged, therefore, by current initiatives, which focus on service fundamentals in a broader joint interagency and coalition context. The air-sea battle concept, for example, is a worthy effort between the Navy and Air Force to address emerging operational and strategic challenges in the global commons. And the Army operating concept is firmly couched in a comprehensive approach to future operations. Emphasizing this important perspective, Secretary Gates has stated, military leaders must have a comprehensive and integrated view of their service future needs and capabilities, a view that encompasses with equal emphasis all of the service's varied missions. We need leaders with vision. We need leaders willing to tackle these difficult issues. We need leaders who are willing to do what's better for our force as a whole and not focus internally on their own service. I agree with the notion expressed recently in a widely circulated article concerning a new national strategic narrative, which states, through a whole-of-nation approach to problem solving, leveraging all the strengths of our nation, not simply those intended to keep perceived threat at safe arm's length away. Investing in sustainable security will be the fiscal challenge shared between a joint force and the rest of the government, often referred to as the interagency. Interagency doesn't substitute for the joint force, but must be more comprehensively factored into solutions via strategy, budgeting, planning, and operations. This more comprehensive approach implies that we will more wisely share resources and burdens and apply them in a most efficient and effective manner. It's ultimately about achieving greater effectiveness in national security while operating more efficiently. Looking abroad, coalition-building initiatives not only enhance legitimacy, but also our own operational effectiveness. Therefore, we must continue to reaching out to train, enable, and encourage our coalition partners, both current and potential future partners. Of course, our international partners are also facing fiscal challenges, so we must achieve our collective security interest in this context. In my experience, partnering in peace is a really good deal in the long run. In the past, during periods of austerity, we've said we will have to do more with less. As we move ahead under significant budget restrictions, we may have to do less with less. We will have to prudently accept risk where in the past we brought down the level of risk. Through all of these significant resource challenges, we must maintain leadership focus. We must sustain rigorously prioritized efforts. We must never take our successes for granted and never be discouraged by setbacks. On this subject, during a previous time of great technological and social change, General Omar Bradley said, "Leadership is intangible, and therefore no weapon ever designed can replace it." Effective leadership today doesn't mean the successful protection of a service budget, a particular weapons system, or a governmental program. Effective leadership in times of momentous strategic uncertainty means navigating often painful change with moral and ethical courage, with physical and mental toughness, and with an appreciation for the greater goal of our nation's long-term prosperity and security. I believe it's the latter form of leadership for which we should strive. I know that one of the greatest successes of our recent warfare experience is the development of a phenomenal generation of young leaders who have what it takes to understand this emerging strategic environment and the joint forces role in it. They have what it takes to meet these challenges. And we need those who have what it takes to make difficult choices in the interest of our nation's security. I ask all of you as you go around, join me in encouraging these young great leaders in continuing to serve our nation during these difficult times, because I believe our future depends on our future military leaders. They will lead us into a bright future. They will lead us through these difficult times, through these difficult problems. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. Any questions, anybody? I can't see you, so you have to speak up. Anybody? Here we go. Sir.
Thank you, General. Hank Giffen from SAIC. The Navy budget is about a third procurement, parts, buying planes, ships, and so on like this, and then the other services, it's a considerable amount. And we obviously have not, I shouldn't say obviously, but in many cases we haven't done very well in bringing those equipment in on time and budget and so on, and we've canceled a number of programs and so on. Do you see a change in the way that the services procure things, particularly along the stuff that might be joint, that we might be able to do a little better job on? Thank you.
Well, this is the question we've been struggling with for many years. I'm sure Secretary Wynne could help me with answering that question, but all the services struggle with this. One of the things that I believe we should take a look at is leveraging technologies that are already being developed in the private sector. One of the things I learned over the last 5-6 years is many technologies were able to be fielded very rapidly to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines in Iraq and Afghanistan by off-the-shelf technologies that were able to be delivered extremely quickly without going through a long, developmental, expensive process. I think we need to look harder at this to see what we can do. I think sometimes we have to think about how far are we trying to look out. If we're trying to develop a system 20 years from now, we all know it'll go under 20 changes as we develop that system. So maybe we reduce the horizon in which we have to look at. And I think we fundamentally do have to look at our acquisition system. And is it delivering what we need it to deliver? And I think across all the services, we've had some issues with this. So I think that's kind of what I would suggest we do in the future. Sir.
General Lynn Wells, National Defense University. You mentioned the new national narrative. Can you hear me? The new national narrative that's been put out, Anne-Marie Slaughter put out recently. Have you had a chance to think about that as a partnership coalition building tool? It lays out a useful ways for Americans to think about it. Have you had a chance to work on it with international partners as well?
Not yet. But I think that is an important piece of this narrative, what you just brought up, is that we have to look differently on how we bring in not only our current coalition partners, but I would argue future partners that we're developing and that will continue to develop around the world, and how we bring them into this whole approach. So first we have to conquer, and we're getting better within our own government, but then we have to move outside. And I think the lesson we've learned is this coalition partnerships and what it brings to us in working with them in solving some of these issues. So I absolutely agree that's part of the narrative that we have to continue to look at. And I think if you just talk with all the combatant commanders, geographical combatant commanders, they'll tell you that's what they're focused on, is how we build these relationships and what do they need to do this as they move to the future. So I think it's a great point. Ma'am.
Thank you, General. My name is Anna Ruska. I brought a group of 16 cadets from North Georgia Military College. And thank you for your wise words. It was very practical, very straight to the point. And I would like to hear what you would have to say to them, to those young men that you were talking about as leading into the future. What sort of advice would you have for them, since they're going to be commissioning in the second lieutenants? And what would you tell them to do now to prepare for that environment?
Well, first, I would just say, I gave about 3 months ago, I went and talked at West Point. I talked about this subject, so I'll try to remember some of the things I said up there. But one of the key pieces, first, is with any leader, is about fundamentals. And first, as you become a leader, it's still about those basic fundamentals. Moral and ethical courage. You know, the hardest thing for a second lieutenant, as I went and visited them on the far ends of a battlefield, is you have a second lieutenant who's 21 or 22 or 23 years old leading a group of men in a very complex environment and has many moral and ethical dilemmas on a daily basis. But that doesn't only happen in combat, it happens wherever you might work and how you deal with these. It's about being broader. We expect much more out of new officers than we did when I was a lieutenant. We expect them to understand a lot more about their environment, about the world around them. It's no longer good enough to understand what you need to do militarily. You have to have a basic understanding of cultures, of political, socioeconomic issues. Now, that'll grow over time as you become more senior, but that's become more important. But it's still basics for young people: physical, mental toughness, moral and ethical, resiliency and behavior. And if we get that up front, they will continue to develop themselves into the type of leaders we need. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
General, I'm Robbie Harris, a former naval person. I would like to ask you to put a fine point on a couple of your comments. The President has challenged Secretary Gates to find $400 billion of savings in the DoD budget. I'd like to ask you how much economies have we wrung out of jointness? Let me state that differently. How much more is there to wring out of jointness to bring economy to the force and produce that $400 billion of savings that the President has challenged Secretary Gates to find?
I think we have to go through that process. And I can't give you a specific answer of how much more efficiency we can get. I don't know. But let me just answer it in this way. We still have redundancy. We have redundancy in missions, redundancy of capabilities. We have to determine how much do we need in order to mitigate the future risks that we're going to face. And then we try to get rid of the redundancies. It might not just be equipment. It could be headquarters. It could be other things that we have to just get a look at. That will save some money. And we have to do that. But ultimately, when you have a cut as big as that, there's going to be, the point I tried to make is going to be some very difficult choices that we have to make. Because it's my position, and I believe Secretary Gates has stated this as well, is we just can't do more with less. That's what's led us to problems in the past. So we're going to have to decide what we are not going to do. And it has to be based on strategy. What strategic issues are we not going to be able to address? What are the things we're going to have to not be able to do for us to potentially reach the sizable cuts that could come down the road? And then we have to have a national security discussion about that. And those would be very, very tough, difficult issues. What are we going to stop doing? You know, and the example, you know, are we going to stop protecting our sea lanes of communication? I don't know. I don't think so. You know, are we going to stop engaging in key areas of the world, in Asia, Europe, Middle East? How are we going to do that? What are the things we're not going to do? So those are the things that have to be addressed from a policy perspective, and we have to relate those policy decisions directly to savings or reductions, and then mitigate and see if the risk is, if we can accept the risk involved in that. And I think that's the discussion that will go on here.
General, thank you very much.
Sure.
General Ron Gumbert from Gartner. Question concerning how we align our capabilities and the functions we go and undertake given the reduction in budget. And you talked a bit about the interagency process and the need for us to call upon the other arms of government to help contribute to the missions that continue to grow for the military, which, in my view, frequently are not what we would consider core military issues. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that discussion going forward so that we're able to align our resources to those areas that matter most to the warfighters?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. All the questions have been great. That's a great question. First, there's one lesson that I learned in all my time in Iraq. It seems like a simple lesson, but it's one I keep repeating to myself whenever I get asked a question like that or I think about the future. What I learned is the limits of military power. Military power can only do so much. You must have other capabilities to exploit what you've been able to achieve through your military capabilities. And what we found over the last several years is in the beginning, we didn't have anything to exploit that, so we used our military because there was nothing else to step in to accomplish some of these goals. So what we have to first is realize that we can't do that anymore, that it can't just be military power alone. In the beginning, we must understand it must be an integrated approach along of diverse capabilities that our government has. Now, the challenge we've had, and everybody knows this, is that the other agencies just simply aren't resourced right now to do this kind of work. It's not that they don't want to do it. It's not that they don't want to contribute, but they're not resourced to do it. So we have to figure out and have a discussion, and from an interagency perspective, how we want to move forward this way. How much do we want the military to do? What are the other agencies' contributions going to be? And how are they going to get the resources to do it? And that's the discussion that we have to have. Thank you.
General Charlie Dunlap, now Duke University. Sir, as you probably know, there's been a lot of discussion in the literature about civil-military relations. I was wondering, what is your assessment of civil-military relations today? And are there things that we need to do, perhaps on the training side, to ensure that we have the right kind of civil-military relations?
Well, I know I did. I know a lot of people have learned a lot about civil-military relationships over the last 10 years. First, as I just got done stating, I think it's absolutely essential to anything we do, that whether it be interagency civil-military cooperation, whether it be understanding the civilian oversight of military, those are all key components to what I think, first, the civil military oversight of our military is absolutely essential to everything we believe in our Constitution. Basic civil-military relationships built between interagencies and military partners, in my mind, is essential to how we move forward. The issue we have is we still have a clash of cultures. And what we've done is we've educated a lot of people, both civil and military, who understand the cultures a bit more now and understand how we can best utilize capabilities, whether it be in the State Department, whether it be in the Treasury Department, whether it be in other lettered agencies, and how we work together to solve problems. But in order to do this, one of the things we have to do is we have a young cadre of officers and, frankly, young civilian workers who are used to now working together. What I worry about is over time, if we don't get them involved in an education system that is interagency and joint in that aspect, we'll lose this as we move forward. And so we have to ingrain it in our programs. We have to have exchange programs. We have to have military exchange programs into some of the other agencies. We need some of the other agencies having exchange programs into the services and the joint force. So they get educated and start to understand the cultures. So when we have to work under pressure, it's much easier to come together and solve these really difficult, complex problems.
Thanks.
Sir? Mark Katanas, VisaNet. Are we at the point where our military is tired seeing themselves coming and going, the point in the problems with the budget, where we have to move into a particular situation, fix it, but don't get involved in nation building? Are we at the point where we just move to a hotspot, take care of it, and move back and avoid nation building?
Well, what you just addressed is kind of my comment on the limits of military power. Is what we've learned is the military can only do so much. However, that said, what you have to do is if an action creates an environment, and we have to assess what that environment and how that environment will impact on our national security, and that'll determine what we do. So I think it's difficult to go in and conduct a military operation. You change life as it is known in that area. And if you just leave, that causes a whole new set of really significant issues. So what we have to be able to do is understand how we transition that from a military to more of a civilian-led operation. And you got to create the environment that allows that to be successful. The issue in Iraq and Afghanistan is it's taken us a very long time to create that environment. In Iraq, it took us 7 years to create that environment. In Afghanistan, it's probably going to take us 12, 13 years to create that environment. So it's about understanding when you go in there for good reasons and you have an impact, we can't just leave it because the aftermath is worse. So what we have to understand is understand how we can deal with this problem up front and learn from the many, many mistakes that we've made in doing this over the last 10 years. And I think what we have to do is just do it better. Again, I don't think the military should ever do nation building. What we have to do is create the environment that is so other agencies who should be doing nation building can do it. Whether it be USAID, whether it be the United Nations, whether it be non-governmental organizations. There's many organizations out there capable of doing nation building, but they have to have the right environment for them to operate in to create the conditions for a country or an area to move forward.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Sir.
General, address a question that looks more at home, even though you haven't been home very much in the last 6 or 8 years, and that is there's a very small percentage of our 320 million people who are directly involved in the wars that we've been in for the past 10 years. I think there's very little doubt among any of us that we don't have an amazingly superb fighting force. Yet it's been 10 years doing its missions. And at that time, the rest of us, unless we have a friend or a member of our family involved, have been somewhat, if not entirely, disconnected. What's the future for the all-volunteer force, especially as it grows in expense and grows in its dislocation from the greater American public, because our history is a culture of citizen soldiers?
Well, I personally I'm a strong believer of the all-volunteer force and the necessity for it in the country. I think because we've had an all-volunteer force, it's allowed us to do things we might not have necessarily been able to do. Although it puts a heck of a lot of strain on the force itself because of what we've had to do and what we will continue to do over the next several years, I think the outcome and the benefit is worthwhile. It is a great point, and it's one that continues to come up, the cost of the all-volunteer force. But I think when you have a professional force where people volunteer to serve, I think it helps us in dealing with many of the really difficult, complex issues and assignments that we have to conduct today. And I don't think we should move away from it. What I do believe, though, is we should do a better job of reaching out to the communities. And I believe that's why it's important. I've learned getting the reserve component more involved in what we're doing, which I think we've done better over the last several years. Because the National Guard and Reserve component reaches much deeper into our own U.S. communities and helps to build awareness of what we're trying to do. I think that people fundamentally, absolutely understand what we're doing. They probably don't understand the sacrifice, they don't understand the impacts on families, but they understand what we're doing and how difficult it is what we're doing. It's interesting that I would just say, and some of it might be economic related, but recruiting closed out earlier than it ever has for all the services this year. I think in March. It closed out in March. Usually the Army, which is the biggest, takes till September to close out. And the last couple of years, they've closed early. The applicants for the military academies are up. And these are young men knowing right now, and women knowing that they are going to probably have to go to war when they go to the military academy. So I think there's enough of a belief of service. I'd like to see service extended much broader than the military. I think service is incredibly important. And everyone should serve in some way, whether it be in your local community, whether it be in your state, whether it be in your federal government, whether it be in some private organization that serves the greater good. I believe what makes a strong nation is people who believe they must contribute something to something that's greater than themselves. And in my mind, that's what we should be encouraging. Sir.
A quick question, sir. This is Mukul from a small company. Just as we treat airspace, naval space as spaces under our jurisdiction, why not treat cyberspace the same way? Currently, most of the military websites are available to foreign nationals from anywhere in the world. Now, I totally understand the security policies, etc., in place, but while we struggle and spend a lot of money on that, why not just make cyberspace totally inaccessible to cyber soldiers from outside? Just cut the cord, no accesses from outside. We still need to continue to invest in security from an internal standpoint because we could have enemies within. While our cyber soldiers from China have access to our military sites at all, even to cruise around.
First, I would just say is, personally, as I now define the global commons, it used to be air, land, sea, I now define the global commons as air, land, sea, space, cyberspace. Now, not everybody does that. That's my definition, because I believe the impact of cyberspace in the future is really significant. The problem we have is we have to balance what we do for our own national security with, again, our own personal beliefs and freedoms, liberties. And so we have to look at this very carefully. And I think establishment of Cyber Command is a major step for us in understanding and believing that this is a really important piece of the future. And I discuss, as we train leaders to move forward and get into these environments we're operating in, one of the key things I talk about all the time is one of the things commanders have to now pay attention to, as much as air, sea, and land, is how you have access to and understand what's going on in the cyber realm. Because it can impact so much on your mission success and what you're trying to achieve in any mission, whether it be tactical, operational, or strategic. And so it's about thought process. We're changing. We got to change quicker than we are, but we got to change our thought processes in this specific area. We're getting better, but we still have a long ways to go. We have to continue to talk about it. And the establishment of Cyber Command and the service subordinate commands to that is a giant step forward in this area. Thank you. Okay, I think that's it. Great. Thank you, everybody.